I've officially maxed out my tax-free investment account. Honestly, guys, I can't believe it. Those are 5 words that I didn't think would be coming out of my mouth given where I was a couple years ago, but here we are. So for anyone that doesn't know, this year I turned 29 years old, which means that my total TFSA contribution room limit was $75,000. Now, as a quick refresher, the TFSA is a Canadian registered investment account that you can start contributing to once you turn 18 years old. The way that this account works is that every year you gain additional contribution room, and it's different depending on the year. We'll throw up a chart on the screen so that you can see what the previous year's individual contribution rooms have been in the past, but at the end of the current year, the government announces what the new year's limit is going to be. Now, what's really cool about the TFSA is that your contribution room builds each and every single year. So from way back when you turned 18, every year the government announced a new limit for that year. But the beauty behind the TFSA is that if you can't or don't contribute that year, your contribution room continues to build because it's cumulative. Basically meaning that you're not penalized for not contributing. So for me, I technically started investing back in 2021 when I turned 25 years old after spending about 2.5 years being dedicated to completely paying off my debt. So if we think about it, from ages 18 to 25, I didn't put any money into this account, meaning that I'd built up $55,500 in contribution room, but then slowly but surely, I started putting money into the account. Around that same time, Steph and I started working on our side hustle, which was our YouTube channel. Now, since then, it's turned into our main hustle, but back then, it really was a true side hustle. On that note, thank you to No Brainers for sponsoring this portion of the video. So the team at No Brainers are friends who explore a bunch of different topics, starting with a question, figuring out the answer, and sharing their failures and everything they learned along the way. We actually made an appearance in their most recent video, which is all about how to actually afford to live in a big expensive city like Toronto. They specifically tried out a few different side hustles to see if it's really possible to make extra money. They busked, they delivered Uber Eats, they sold things online. You'll have to check out the video to see the rest and hear our tips on how to save money and get the most out of your hustle. We'll have the video linked in our description box, so check it out after this. Now back to me. So when we quit our jobs and started doing YouTube full time, my income took a dip, which meant that I slowed down on my investment contributions for a few years. But between this year and last year, I finally started to pick up steam and finally caught up to my max contribution room. I officially maxed out my TFSA in October, which means that I've been able to invest a total of $75,000 into my TFSA, which is really, really exciting. Also, given the fact that we have 2 months left in the year, and given that I invest $2,000 each and every single month, that means that I have $4,000 dedicated to investments for the remainder of the year. Only in this case, I don't have an account that I can actually put more money into. So if you're wondering what I plan to do next or which account I plan to open next, that's what I'm gonna be explaining throughout this video. And oh yeah, so for anyone who's shocked, considering that I told you guys earlier this year that my account was sitting at just $38,000, I'll explain where all of this money came from. Now, before we even get into all of that, the first thing that I wanna explain is why I even cared to max out my TFSA in the first place. And keep in mind that there's a bunch of different angles that we can look at this from. First and foremost, the TFSA is hands down my favorite account, so both from a registered and unregistered accounts perspective. Similar to the American Roth IRA or an ISA in the UK, the TFSA offers you tax-free growth and tax-free withdrawals, basically meaning that you don't have to pay taxes on anything that you contribute ever, unless of course you break one of the rules. This account to me is the easiest no-brainer account for anyone who's just starting out on their investing journey because you don't really have to worry about much. Come tax time or come retirement time, there's literally no extra work that you have to do or no surprises that are popping out at you. And as long as you have your long-term strategy in place, you're more or less ready to go with this account. Now, similar to Steph, I know she kind of touched on this when she maxed out her TFSA earlier this year, but for me specifically, my 20s have been the years where I've been laying the foundation or the building blocks for the years to come, especially from a money perspective. The way that we see it is that right now, we literally have little to no major expenses. We don't have expensive living costs, so no mortgage. We don't have a car. We don't have kids. Realistically, as long as I can prioritize it, I have the ability to invest a lot of money consistently right now. You know, it's kind of funny because I was telling Steph literally like the other day just how crazy your monthly investing amount can have long term. It's almost like me investing a solid percentage percentage of my income over the course of a couple years has just really reaffirmed what I already knew, which is that yes, you should definitely increase your income over time. In fact, I think that's one of the most important things that you can do for yourself financially that people rarely talk about. But it's honestly mostly about time and contributing as much as you can as early as you can. On top of that, the earlier you can start investing, the more time you have for your money to grow and compound. Like we've said in so many of our videos, time in the market is key to seeing that big number that you want to see in the future, so why not start as early as you can? Now, from a long-term investing perspective, the numbers don't lie. In fact, I remember when I was looking to start my journey, I remember talking to one of my friends who just couldn't wrap his head around why investing, let alone opening a TFSA, was important. We would have these long conversations on why he should stop adding money into his savings account and instead open up a TFSA and start investing, but he just didn't see it. I remember pulling up an investment calculator and showing him that if he invested $100,000 by age 30 and just stopped investing, obviously you shouldn't stop, but if he decided to just throw everything out of the window that we had talked about and just stop investing, in another 30 years, his $100,000 investment would be worth approximately $1 million. Now, the main reason why I chose the TFSA as opposed to an account like the RSP, for example, was because I wasn't in my highest income earning years, or I hope that I wasn't in my highest income earning years. See, similar to the TFSA, the RSP is also a registered account, which means that you get tax benefits when you contribute to it. But eventually, you do have to pay taxes on your money when you go to make withdrawals. When we talk about time in the market, for me, it just made sense to start with my tax-free account and then move on from there. In theory, I could have contributed to it and then at some point taken advantage of something like the first-time home buyers plan, but our focus was on getting as much of our money invested for the long term and not taking it out of our accounts to buy something like a house. Again, if we compare this account to the RRSP, the TFSA can serve a variety of purposes, meaning that if you decide to use that money for something other than retirement, hopefully you don't have to, and you decide to sell your investments and then take that money and withdraw it from your account, it'll be a much easier process. Now let's walk through my investing journey in a little more detail because I'm sure that there's a lot of you that can either relate to it or can understand where I'm coming from. So like I already mentioned, between the ages of 18 to 25, two key things were going on in my life at the time. So number one, I was in school for 5 years, which resulted in me having $50,000 in student loan debt. And if you're doing the math, that takes us from about 18 to 23. And two, because I had this debt for 2.5 years, so from 23 to about 25, I was busy trying to pay off this debt with a relatively junior salary amount. Now, all of this is really important to understand because if we look at the big picture, it's really only been 3 short years since I started investing, with one of those years being a year where I pulled back on investing after quitting my corporate job, which honestly just really goes to show you that you can cover a lot of ground in a really short period of time. Now, if you guys remember, two of the main things that I really struggled with when I first opened my TFSA were 1, analysis paralysis, and 2, information overload. Basically, I'm a very analytical and in the weeds type of person, and just to give you guys an example, I'm the type of person who spends an entire week deep diving and researching what the best toaster is. So when it came to figuring out where I should be putting my hard-earned money each and every single month, it was a lot. Now, the problem at the time was that it felt like there were so many answers to what felt like such a straightforward question. What's the best place to invest your money? And ideally a place where I would minimize the amount of regret that I would have just simply based on whatever lack of knowledge that I would have had at the time. Anyways, I ended up landing on something called factor investing, where I would invest my money into 6 different ETFs. And if I'm being honest with you guys, it was just way too complicated for my liking. Listen, I'm someone who loves a challenge, but there's a difference between the idea of managing a portfolio of 6 ETFs and the actual day-to-day. What I learned was that harder doesn't always mean better, and the more complicated your portfolio is, the higher the probability of you messing up, aka tracking error. So I basically started investing in this portfolio along with some individual stocks for about a year, until one day I had this epiphany where I said to myself, you know, there's gotta be a better way, and there was. That's when I started looking more into asset allocation ETFs, or in other words, the all-in-one ETFs that we talk about a lot on this channel. All-in-one ETFs are products where you literally just buy one ETF and that's all you need for your entire portfolio. So instead of trying to play games and outsmart the market, I said to myself, why not buy this one fund where I get great geographic diversification? It's only invested in equities, so in theory, the risk is maxed out because I've got so many years left up until I need the money for retirement. And that's exactly what I did. I chose XEQT for my TFSA, and that's all that I've been investing in since then and for the foreseeable future. Now, something that we haven't talked about is how I was able to max out my TFSA, considering my account was sitting at $38,000 at the beginning of the year. Well, we're gonna do a video that comes out very soon that details everything that happened with our money this year more in depth. But if you guys remember, I did have $20,000 sitting in a high interest savings account at the beginning of the year, just in case, so on the sidelines, just in case we had some major purchases come up. I guess partway throughout the year, I decided that I actually didn't need to have that money in my account. So instead, I decided to dump it all into my TFSA. What's funny and is kind of a side note is that I wish I'd done it earlier in the year, just given how much XEQT has gone up by this year. But hey, we're long-term investors here. We're not worried about the price in the short term. Whether it's high or low, we're still buying. Anyways, that amount, along with my $2,000 monthly contributions, allowed me to reach that goal a lot sooner than I thought and was expecting, and honestly, that's amazing. Okay, so now in terms of what I'm gonna be doing next and which account I'm gonna be opening up next, that's gonna be an FHSA, or the First Home Savings Account. That may or may not be a surprise for a lot of you, but for me, it's the account that makes the most sense given where I am in my life right now. The way that I look at it is that I've now maxed out my TFSA, so check. I've never owned a home and would like to buy one at some point for me to live in the future, so check. And I know the perks that differentiate the FHSA and the RRSP, so check. Now let's break that down. So the FHSA is Canada's newest registered investment account, and it basically combines everything that we love about the TFSA and the RRSP. This means that it's both tax-free and it reduces your taxable income. Basically, when you contribute to an FHSA, it reduces your taxable income for that year, just like an RRSP does. So for example, if your income this year was $70,000 and you contributed $5,000 to your FHSA, your taxable income would now be $65,000, meaning that you get to pay less taxes in the short term. But unlike the RRSP and more like the TFSA, you also get to take that money that you invested out tax-free in the future. Also, I feel like people sometimes forget that even if you don't end up using your FHSA for its intended purpose, you can roll it into your RRSP, so you don't really have to worry about that. Now, I'm not gonna go too in depth on how the FHSA works, but you can actually check out our dedicated video if you wanna learn more. For me, the main thing that I had to consider was the fact that the FHSA has a yearly contribution limit of $8,000 for every year that it's open, with a maximum lifetime contribution limit of $40,000. As of right now, there's 2 months left in the year, so as soon as I open up my FHSA, I'll have $8,000 available for me to contribute. This also means that I have $4,000 left to contribute for this year, meaning that I'll be halfway to maxing out my FHSA for the year. Now, as soon as January hits, I'll also have an additional $8,000 worth of room added for a total of $16,000 in FHSA contribution room. But because it's the new year, my TFSA will also increase in contribution room, likely by $7,000. So really, the question will be, do I continue maxing out my FHSA or do I go back to my TFSA? Well, I'll tell you this, there's definitely a hierarchy to how we personally view our investment accounts, and it goes like this: the TFSA, the FHSA, and then the RRSP. Basically, the quicker that I can remax out my TFSA, the better it'll be for my long-term portfolio. Plus, it'll have the lowest amount of contribution room added for any of my individual accounts, meaning that it really shouldn't take me that long to remax it out. From there, I'll get back to maxing out my FHSA, which should have a contribution room of $12,000 left, and then after that, we'll head over to my RRSP, which should have anywhere from $50,000 to $60,000 in contribution room. But once I get there, I'll let you guys know what the actual exact number is. Anyways, so for anyone who's currently on their journey to maxing out any of their accounts or is even currently paying off some of their debts, the one thing that I want to leave you with is some perspective on just how big of a milestone this is. Only 4 to 5% of eligible Canadians have maxed out their TFSAs as of 2023, which is approximately 1.6 to 2 million people in a country that has over 40 million people. Just take that in for a second. Our goal at the end of the day, as we're sharing our journeys, is to get as many of you guys on your journeys, no matter where that is for you. For some people, it's paying off debt. It could be maxing out your kids' RESPs. It could be getting started on the basics of investing. Whatever it is, just know that if you've started, You are doing a great job and we cannot wait to, you know, celebrate with you. With that, thank you again to No Brainers for sponsoring this video, and don't forget to check out their video all about side hustles that we'll have linked in the description box below.